All right, next up, it looks like this is a panel or workshop, Implicit Bias. Uh, I am, by the title, very intrigued. So, are the participants on, Kristen?
They are being promoted to panelist right now, and
Love it. Oh, here
go
we
ahead and
go. I see
accept
a
the
couple.
request. And I will, if you haven't gotten it, let me know that I haven't gotten you.
All right, so we got a whole group. This is wonderful. So go ahead. I'll let you take it from here. So whoever wants to take lead, go ahead and introduce yourself and begin the presentation.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. My name is Caitlin Power. We are all so grateful to have you here today, and we are very excited to present to you our Implicit Bias webinar sponsored by the Global Collabs Equality Hub.
And in this webinar, we're going to be shattering the ceilings and breaking the bias. But first, let's start off with meeting the Equality Hub.
Right. To start off, I am the team mentor for the Equality Hub. I live in Lafayette, Colorado, and I'm currently a junior in high school. And I'm really excited to get to present to you guys today so we can all learn a little bit more about how to dismantle our internal biases.
Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Tran. I am a senior at Beller High School in Houston, Texas. I'm also another ambassador with Caitlin Powers for Equality Hub. We are super excited that we're presenting today, and I can't wait for everyone to learn and see what we really have for y'all.
Hello everyone, this is Valeria. I am from Mexico. I am the social media liaison for the Global Collab. And as well, I'm super excited to have you all here today and let's learn some new stuff today.
Hello everyone, here is Gökç. I'm from Turkey, Burdur. I'm a sophomore this year, and I'm really happy to be here with you today. I hope we will gain new experiences with you.
Hi everyone, it's nice to meet you. I'm Madeleine. I'm a senior in high school in Toronto, Canada, and I'm also the secretary for the Equality Hub, and we're just really excited for you to hear this presentation.
All right, here's a quick overview of our webinar for today. First, we're going to be talking about what is implicit bias. Second, when is implicit bias developed? The science behind bias, factors that influence it, challenging it, and finally, practicing on how to identify implicit bias. So let's start off with a quick question. You see two people on different sides of the street. Which side would you walk on? Me personally, I would choose walking on the side of the woman with the bottom picture on the side because I'm just overall more comfortable and with the same genders. But yeah, I think this is an important audience question to think about first, which because it leads into why. Well, we all have biases that we might not realize exist. First, bias impacts how we impact and view others. It creeps into our first impressions, our assumptions, and the stories that we tell ourselves about who someone is before we really ever truly know them. Oftentimes, we don't even realize it's happening. And then, second, confronting bias requires the necessary work of asking ourselves difficult questions like, why did I think that? Where did that assumption come from? Who taught me this? And is it actually true? This kind of self reflection isn't easy, but it's necessary if we want to grow beyond automatic judgments. And then finally, once we recognize our biases, we can start that powerful change with that awareness. We can uproot ideas that no longer serve us and replace them with more accurate, honest truths. And when we do that, the impact goes beyond us because it changes how we directly treat others, how we listen, but most importantly, how we show up in the world. Because in the end, challenging bias doesn't just improve our own lives, it improves the lives of everyone around us surrounding our communities. But yes, the number one question overall is what comes to mind when you hear the word bias?
So, to defeat our enemy, first we get to know it, shall we? So, what is implicit bias really? Implicit bias is usually defined as an unconscious belief about a group of people that affects our behavior and decisions, or even sometimes our ideas. Simply put, it's an internal prejudice that leads to automatic thoughts and actions. We are often not aware of these biases. This is why we call them unconscious biases. But they still influence how we see and how we treat others. So please, next slide. Thank you. Let's talk about some common ways implicit bias expresses itself. Implicit bias can appear in many different ways in everyday life, sometimes with an action or with a word or even with a satire that we do not consider as an issue, but in fact a consequence of our biases. Let me give you some examples so that you can think for yourself. For example, when someone meets a person with a Spanish last name or who speaks another language than English and assumes that they are immigrants. In fact, they can be bilingual or they can be even a tourist. Another example is when people think someone from an African country must be poor or maybe lack modern technologies such as smartphones or even electricity, which is not true because the African continent is a really developed country and still developing. Another example is when a Muslim colleague is unfairly associated with extremism just because their beliefs. Or a woman applies for a physical demanding job and others assume she cannot do it. Maybe the boss tries to protect this woman from physical demanding job. However, we should see that this is not even protecting. This is discriminating. So these examples of how implicit bias can influence our thinking without us realizing. You might think that this is extreme, this do not happen this much, but we have to know that even if these examples may seem extreme or unrealistic, they actually happen, but you just do not see it. This is why we call them unconscious, because we are not realizing it. And most importantly, these hidden beliefs can lead to harmful actions and unfair treatments, like a snowball effect. That is why understanding implicit bias is so important before the consequences are really bad. So, we have a next audience question. Are there groups of people you rarely meet or interact with? If yes, who? And when you answer these questions, I want you to keep asking why. Why did I choose this? Or why I'm not interacting with them? For example, I have rare interaction with Chinese people because I do not have many people in my area. But even though I can try to reach out for them from social media and other platforms. So I want you to think for yourself and address your own bias.
Well, now that we have established and seen how subtle implicit bias can be, we have to wonder, where does this all start? Why do we, as informed, educated people, begin to believe these stories about our local, national, and global peers? And the answer to that question is very, very young, often as young as 3 to 5 years old, which highlights what we said earlier about biases coming from others. We all grow up in specific environments that lay the foundations for our fundamental beliefs. And as a result, even toddlers have been observed to demonstrate biased behaviors. For example, social scientists have discovered that some of the ways implicit biases are established through exposure to negative stereotypes, personal experiences over time, and learned associations, which we often see in the media, on television or social media, for example. And two well-known studies that help develop these conclusions are the Dole test in the USA and facial activities in China. So imagine you're a 5-year-old child. You're sitting in a quiet room at Columbia University, and in front of you are 4 dolls, exactly the same, except for one thing. 2 of the dolls are white, 2 of the dolls are black. And a kind voice asks you, which one of the dolls is a nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll looks like you? And that was a reality in the 1940s, when psychologists Dr. Kenneth and Mamie Clark conducted what became known as a Dole test. Children just 3 to 7 years old consistently chose the white doll as pretty, smart, and good. The black doll labeled ugly, dumb, or bad. Even black children heartbreakingly associated negative traits with the doll that looked like them. And these findings revealed something deeply disturbing, that racial bias and internalized racism were already rooted in children barely out of preschool. The Clark's work would later become pivotal evidence in Brown v. Board of Education, the landmark Supreme Court case that ended legal segregation in schools. And now let's look at the study from China. Preschoolers were shown racially ambiguous faces with different expressions. When the faces looked angry, kids often said they were African, but when the faces were happy, they were Chinese. But here's the powerful part. One group of kids learned about African culture and their bias dropped. The other group learned only about Chinese culture and the bias stayed. So even at preschool age, exposure to other cultures can reduce bias, which showcases how education is a driving force for change. And for the added questions in this part, I want you to think about our social circle. You know, how similar or different are the people in your circle? And does a lack of diversity reinforce certain ideas? In my case, for example, I don't really have many friends who are from other parts of Latin America. I don't know Argentinian people or Colombian people. And that may make me do some presumptions about the South American part of the same continent I am living in. And that obviously reinforces pre-existing ideas.
Thank you so much, Anna, for giving us a little bit of context about when bias develops. Now, because implicit bias involves a blend of mental perceptions and emotional responses, it is helpful to learn about the neuroscience behind these beliefs. The brain has three key areas where our emotions and thoughts are housed and developed. The amygdala holds our fight or flight reflexes, the hippocampus stores our memories, and the prefrontal cortex helps us build meaning based on information. Based on repeated experiences or learned practices and behaviors, our brain will build shortcuts to help us process and respond to different situations when we are stressed. The problem is that our brain builds shortcuts based on false or incomplete information, and our responses are not always accurate, appropriate, or kind. One particularly dangerous example of this is when we begin to perceive or think of groups or communities as simplistic and not build the idea that they are complex individuals. As a result, we build these biases and prejudices based on one or two isolated situations, and we don't fully understand and apply them to all people. This can lead to negative actions such as microaggressions, discriminations, and even sometimes violence. Which leads us to our audience question. Why do the little things like someone's tone, expression, trigger such fast assumptions? Hopefully, after listening to that, you could think that it's possibly the shortcuts that we build in our mind that trigger fast assumptions, and now we can start to realize that they are not always true. Which is why we have to start looking at the factors that actually influence implicit bias. We've explained that it does not develop in a vacuum. So let's see what worsens or lessens the negativity. You see here 6 of the most common influences of implicit bias. While we cannot cover all of them now, we will discuss the 3 most powerful influencers. Some of these include personal experiences, cultural conditioning, media portrayals, upbringing, and different education types, as well as inflexible mentality. Personal experiences can include a variety of things. For example, if a woman treats you in a particularly bad way, it may make you feel wary of another woman, afraid that someone else will treat you in that same way. This might encourage avoidance behavior or even lead you to discriminate against women, even if you are not aware of doing this. This is what we talk about with microaggressions. This could lead to an unkind word, a cold eye, or just a general cold disposition towards someone who you don't even know based on prior experiences that did not even involve them. The next is cultural conditioning. For example, there are many stereotypes about Africa from non-Africans. For example, many non-African people usually think that Africa is an underdeveloped country. And according to these people, Africans are barbarians, which is simply untrue. And this misrepresentation can make people actually think this way. But the thing is, we don't actually know. If you are not coming from a place of empathy and actually trying to learn about this, you're going to let what you've been told control what you think of others. Cultural conditioning is a process where we absorb the influences, norms, and messages from the environment that we live in, which is why it's so important that we encourage global dialogue. That way, we as people and teens and communities are able to start dismantling these biases that are built by cultural conditioning. Now, I'd like to pose another audience question. Have you ever felt like someone acted towards you without knowing you based on implicit bias? I don't know about the audience, but I certainly have, which just shows how it really does influence everyone. Now I'll pass it on to Samantha to describe the rest of them.
Now, let's talk about one of the most critical aspects, educational types. Well, we are all aware that education plays one of the most important aspects in our foundation, especially contributing to our critical thinking processes. But that leads us to wonder, how does education affect our implicit biases? Well, different educational approaches shape how implicit bias is formed, or whether or not it's substantial or minimal. For example, lecture-based learning can reinforce stereotypes when diverse views are absent, while interactive or experimental methods directly help students question assumptions. Inclusive, multicultural curricula directly raises awareness of hidden biases, and critical thinking programs promote fairer and overall more empathetic attitudes. But next up, media portrayals. I'd argue, especially in today's day and age, it's critical. But why? Well, social media influences implicit bias by reinforcing existing prejudices, spreading misinformation, and increasing harmful stereotypes by creating an environment for online harassments. And everybody, especially the younger generation, has experienced some form of that. But by the way of illustration, seeing white people on television shows more than Black people makes audience feel somewhat strange when they see a Black person in their lives. But that was more specifically oriented towards the past. And we see less of that now. Now, upbringing is also important because the way we were raised affects the way we think and act about certain groups in certain situations. Environment is the most important aspect on how we grow up and how we create that type of implicit bias, even if we're unaware of that. These unfamiliar ways of living and cultural differences are examples of biases that can develop based on our upbringing, which is why we often see an inflexible mentality. Every person has biases and makes preemptive and untruthful judgments, even if they don't want to. But it's important to recognize that we have those biases and we should be open to change to build a promising future of understanding. Because understanding biases is one thing, but taking the initiative to directly counteract that and improve is how we learn to grow and create more of a growth mentality. Which leads us to, how does a growth mindset factor into challenging implicit bias and why is it important? I'd argue that maintaining that type of inflexible mentality is what hinders us from achieving more. When we have a growth mindset, we can see more diverse perspectives and truly learn how to confront different type of ideas.
Lastly, after hearing so much weighty information, you might begin to feel that implicit bias is this insurmountable challenge, but thankfully, it's not. We can challenge and undo implicit bias, both individually and collectively. So now we'll talk about the power we all have to change the world around us for good. Here you'll see some daily steps we can each take to first undo our own implicit bias, and then work with others to pass along the positive change. If we all commit to at least focusing on one of these changes per day, we can begin to uproot the thinking that separates communities and begin planting positive concepts to rebuild connections and develop healthy social relationships. Here are some strategies. Stereotype replacement. We can work to be more aware of assumptions about communities and replace them with more accurate and positive concepts. For example, instead of assuming that all people of East Asian descent are good at math and science, we can celebrate a friend's musical talent and the work they've put into cultivating that. for contact and individuating, making a new friend from a different background or culture, and helping to build one-on-one connections will destroy negative perceptions. It also helps us to appreciate specific individuals instead of making assumptions about the groups that they belong to. Through emotional regulation, we can help with our automotive responses, as mentioned by Caitlyn earlier, which can lead to involuntary physical responses like faster heart rates. Being aware of these reactions and the implicit bias that triggers them and then we can make a new conscious decision to retrain our brain by instead just saying hello or waving to the new person we see. With mindfulness, we can use this awareness to redirect our automatic and unfounded responses to diverse communities. And lastly, and most importantly, is listening. Be open and respectful to hearing other people's perspectives, their insights, and their experiences, and see how those affect you and how they differ from your own lives. There are, of course, challenges to implementing these changes, as implicit bias is a very difficult subject to confront internally. Many people are often in denial and defensive about their biases in order to maintain their own positive self-image. And also, not everyone understands what implicit bias is, which makes it hard to actually acknowledge and respond. Thankfully, we have webinars and promotional opportunities like this to spread the word about implicit bias so that more people can begin this process of confronting it. As well, biases are frequently reinforced by societal pressures, which can make it very difficult for people to challenge, especially in environments where biases are shared so frequently and so openly. But at the end of the day, all of us have different biases that impact our decisions and our behaviors. However, we all have the responsibility and the ability in general to change, act, and grow our biases. We all have the responsibility to do our best to create a fair and inclusive environment around us.
Thank you all so much for listening. We loved presenting to y'all, and we hope that this is an educational moment for everyone. I think it's important to recognize that everyone has implicit bias, but it's not inherently a bad thing because everyone deserves grace in it. Because as long as we take the initiative to confront it, we have the ability to make a overall better community in general and for everyone. But yes, please join Global Collab Network. This is our tiny URL if you would like to join in, everybody. But yeah, this is the Global Collab Equality Hub, and we are so grateful and thankful that we were offered this opportunity to do this. We hope everyone had an amazing time.
Thank you guys so much. If you know any teens or adults who are really interested or invested, we'd love to see you guys. This is a mainly teen-based organization, and we hope to uplift youth voices to take action so the next generation can make the world a little bit better.
Can you guys
Absolutely. Thank you for
tell
having us.
people a little bit more about how they could join if they're interested?
I was just going to ask the same thing.
So if you're interested, we have this link right down in the slides. It's tinyurl.com/join equality hub. Or if you would like, you can just type on Google Global Collab, and there's a multitude of different UN SDG hubs that's more fitting towards their taste. If they don't want specifically equality, like for environment or, Pakistan, we also have the hub for that as well. We would love for more teens to join and really make a type of impact that we're all searching for to improve our world.
And if you are not a teen, we are also always looking for mentors. So if you are someone who's really passionate about the UN SDGs, we would love to see you in our hubs.
Absolutely.
I am a little curious if you guys or you all could speak a little bit more about to those that are aware, like we know awareness is not enough. We need to do the next step. So if somebody is aware there's a problem, but is uncomfortable, what would you say to them? Like if they are aware of either an implicit bias or they maybe want to step outside of their comfort zone, how do you encourage somebody to move beyond just the awareness that they have the bias?
So, me personally, I'd say that yes, it's important to recognize that's the first step. But I'd argue the most essential step is communication and discussion. Being there to facilitate that type of environment is what encourages a more growth mindset. Because recognizing it, sure, But if you're willing to step out there and actually talk to people and have discussions that directly show you whether or not the bias you have is detrimental. But yeah.
Also, I want to recommend something too. If you're really discomfort with doing that, I would recommend you to look from other perspectives. For example, we talked about unconscious, like we do not see it. But if you go and ask, for example, Samantha, are you uncomfortable with my action? So Samantha can tell me, yes, I'm really, and this makes me so sad and makes me feel angry and everything. This would create an empathy between us, which leads us to change our biases to for a better future and for a better relationship between us.
And on that note of building empathy, if these kinds of conversations are really scary to you, a really good first step is reading other people's stories. That is one of the best ways that I've built empathy in my day-to-day life is because I'm an avid reader. I try to get my hands on every book I can, and it is from those global perspectives and different stories that I have been able to start challenging my own implicit bias.
We have another question from the YouTube thread here. Somebody was asking, in the AI era, what do you think is the impact of bias on AI models and AI applications? And what are your ideas about that?
I would say the main thing is skewed data. Obviously, if an AI model is trained within a specific data in mind, then it's going to repeat that. For example, if it trains that job applications are most likely, outward towards men, then it's obviously going to hire more men than women. And I would say, like, if you work in that industry, then it is important that you are mindful of what data you're training your AI in, because it is replicating the own biases that humans are having now into trained models.
And as well, if you're receiving your information from AI models, and if you're going to it for information, or even if you're seeking it out as your own first step, you can go into it with the conscious knowledge that AI does present bias in its information, and you can look for that in the information it presents to you and have a conversation with yourself about where this information has come from and just treat it as an exercise, I guess.
I would also like to add that in recent developments, if I remember from this MIT article in 2025, they found that they're actively improving certain algorithms for AI that substantially decrease bias. Because sure, yes, bad data going to AI can create the type of bias inherently, but these algorithms that these new researchers have discovered are directly counteracting that, which has been decreasing bias, making AI overall better in general.
That's fascinating. I want to take a little bit of a left turn question, I guess. Is I want to hear from you all, get a little bit more personal, maybe if you're willing to, kind of step out and say, what are some examples that you maybe had to face of your own bias as you started this journey and learning about implicit bias, even as a group of all young women? What are some of the challenges that you've had to face in this journey?
I'm happy to take that question. So, something that we've all done is taken the Harvard implicit bias tests because we wanted to know a little bit about our own personal biases. And one experience and one test result that really resonated with me was my bias against people with different ability levels. So, I noticed that I'm very biased against people who had disabilities, which I'm really grateful that I was aware of because recently my father moved in with a woman who has a disability. So I was able to better understand what it's like for her. I was able to better connect with her experience. And is that exposure to someone who doesn't have a, what I would say, average ability level, it has really helped me connect with her. And it's challenged my own biases about what different people are capable of doing. And I think that's been really helpful because I didn't even know that I had such a deep bias ingrained in me. But it's really good because now I'm starting to rework the way that I think about people with different like mental ability levels and physical.
That's incredible. I mean, I appreciate you being so vulnerable. That's amazing that you're able to identify that and grow. Is that test available for everybody? If anybody was trying to seek out how to do that, is that a free test online?
Yes.
And
That's
also,
very
I
good.
want to say that Throughout this webinar, as Caitlyn said, we learned our own biases, and I want everyone to be comfortable with their own biases too. Because even though we are into equality and we are taking actions on racism, on implicit bias, on injustices and everything, we do have our own biases too. And the most important thing to learn, address, and take action. So please do not blame yourself for having these, just to try to be better and just try to solve this issue. Thank you.
I think
Love
that's
that.
the
I think that was an
perfect.
important ending. Yeah.
I was good. Yeah, I think that's the perfect thing to end on. I think that is fantastic.
Yes. Thank you all. You did a wonderful presentation. I think it's such a powerful topic for us all to continue to discuss and learn. Uh, I think we will go ahead and move on to the next presentation.
Thank you so much for
AI.
having us.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Keep doing the work.
Thank you.